and welcome back to the podcast. So, Tara, we are going to talk about the climate crisis yet again. We know that climate change has replaced COVID as the new fear that the establishment is using to try and exert control over all of us. And we've already done a lot of episodes on this and covered the insane agendas like banning gas stoves and light bulbs. And of course, fossil fuels and CO2 are just these horrible things that we need to fear. But when you actually look at the facts, the last 10 years have not hit record highs like the media tries to make it sound like they have. In fact, if you look back at the 1930s, the temperatures were way hotter than now. So we're gonna go over like a lot of different things in today's episode that you can bring up if you have a friend or come across someone on social media that tries to throw this climate nonsense in your face. So go ahead and just send them this episode and it'll shut them up real quick. So some states in the West are having unusually high temperatures. But then you have some states in the Midwest that are having some of the lowest. Right? It's like the climate, it's always changing. There's highs, there's lows all the time. And when you look back in the 1970s, they said we'd have another ice age by the 21st century because air pollution was going to completely block out the sun. And then in the 80s, it was the UN saying that we'd have an environmental catastrophe worse than any nuclear holocaust by the year 2000. And then, of course, we know they shifted it to global warming, saying that the Arctic ice caps were going to completely melt. But just like weather reporters, they've been wrong 100% of the time, yet people keep listening to them. And even RFK Jr., who's a Democrat, admitted that this whole climate crisis is really just an agenda that's being used to control us through fear. But climate alarmists are picking and choosing which data and facts that they're going to use and molding them into this perfect fear-based agenda to assert their control over our way of life. And you might be asking, like, well, why? What would be the motive? Why would they do that? Well, just look at the stock picks for any of these people that are pushing the green agenda, and it'll tell you everything that you need to know. So let's look at the truth and some facts, some real facts. Fossil fuels have been a big contributor to our way of life. They're cheap and they allowed even people in severe poverty and third world countries to live more comfortable lives and be cleaner and safer, like in every way possible. When you think about it, our healthcare system takes a considerable amount of energy to run hospitals and equipment. Our agriculture and food system depends on it. And without fossil fuels and natural gas, guess what? Our agriculture system collapses. And I was listening to a PragerU video that said that the World Farmers Organization said that the prices of fertilizer are up 78% from 2021.
In 2 years.
Yes, 78%. That's insane. And so what's happening is the wealthier nations are buying it up, and then the poor nations are left to starve because without fertilizer, you're not going to grow shit. And, people that are living paycheck to paycheck, which is pretty much most Americans at this day, like this point in time, they count on affordable fossil fuels to get to work, to heat their homes in the winter. I mean, the fossil fuels have completely revolutionized our world. And now they're painted as like this big enemy that we should all hate, right? Big government wants to end them, and they say it's all because it's causing the climate crisis, when the real climate crisis is completely man-made, but not in the way you think. Green policies are what has created a shortage in the supply of fossil fuels. And any Economy 101 class will tell you that when supply goes down, demand goes up. And when demand goes up, prices go up. And the people that this affects the most are the people living paycheck to paycheck that can't afford to pay a little bit more for gas and a little bit more for groceries and a little bit more for energy bills and basically everything else, since our entire world runs on fossil fuels. So when the price of it goes up, it affects everything. every type of good you can possibly think of due to high transportation costs. And obviously, it's not a big deal to the liberal elites that are pushing these policies, but it can literally mean not having enough money to pay the heating bill in winter, or having to choose between gassing up your car to get to work or paying for the groceries that you need for your family. So, like, this is the reality that people are starting to see, and hopefully is waking them up to realize this climate crisis is man-made by the liberal elites, and it's making our lives a lot worse. So the media and big government, they try to tell you that climate change is causing these crazy extreme weather events that kill people. I mean, it's dangerous. But the truth is, more people died before fossil fuels from extreme weather, since they couldn't easily and quickly and affordably leave or prepare. And, this was before gas fueled cars, generators, and other resources that help people in emergencies that we now have because we have fossil fuels. And more people also died from air pollution before fossil fuels because they had to heat their homes with like wood stoves. And it was very common for people to inhale this kind of smoke and pollution and actually die from it. And then on the flip side, you had people dying from extreme cold temperatures because they didn't have a cheap, easy way to heat their home. So if you look at the statistic, it says that climate disaster deaths have actually decreased 98% over the last century. So that's a stat that we can throw out at any of these climate alarmists, and it's easy to remember.
Yeah, except the media definitely wants us to believe otherwise, because speaking of extreme weather and climate change, it seems that the United States has set a new record for the number of weather disasters in a year, costing $1 billion or more each. And the year isn't over yet. So on Monday, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration made this announcement, citing that there have been 23 separate climate catastrophes in the United States so far this year, costing more than $57.6 billion and killing 253 people. There have been 8 disasters costing over $1 billion each in just the past 2 months, including Hurricane Idalia, the Maui fires. There was a hailstorm in Minnesota, a variety of severe storms in the Northeast, Nebraska, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, Ohio, Tennessee, and Georgia. There was deadly flooding in the Northeast and Pennsylvania. And these numbers don't include the cost of Tropical Storm Hillary that hit California a few weeks ago. And there was also a recent deep drought in the South and the Midwest that are not included in these numbers because they're still totaling the cost of those events. And of course, experts are warning that these disasters are all due to climate change. And the media is hyping up these scare tactics about how these events are unprecedented and it's only going to get worse. And I read this article in the Sierra Sun Times. It was like a total doomsday article. And it was talking about how, like, the reason the Maui fires got out of control was because of the strong winds from Hurricane Dora, and that Hurricane Hillary was responsible for the first ever tropical storm watch issued for Southern California. And Hurricane Idalia in Florida was the strongest hurricane to hit the region in more than 125 years. So there's definitely this push to blame all of the weather destruction on climate change. And that's what people are focused on because that's the narrative that we're repeatedly being fed. But the truth is exactly what you were saying before, Stephanie. Like, the worst climate disasters, even if you just look at the United States and not the rest of the world, the worst climate disasters in the United States occurred in the 1800s and early 1900s when people didn't have the means to prepare or escape, and we didn't have fossil fuels. Like, you can research all of this. There was the Great Galveston Storm of 1900, where they didn't name hurricanes back then, but a hurricane killed approximately 8,000 people in Texas, and it's still considered the single deadliest storm in U.S. history. There was the 1906 San Francisco earthquake that resulted in like hundreds of fires from ruptured gas lines and killed over 3,000 people. There was the Peshtigo fire in Wisconsin and Michigan in 1871 that was caused by drought conditions that triggered like a string of wildfires and killed over 2,500 people, which apparently is more than any other fire in American history. There was the Okeechobee hurricane that claimed 2,500 lives in Florida in 1928. There was a storm that drowned 2,000 people in coastal Georgia and South Carolina in 1893, and the list goes on and on and on. So, were these incidents being blamed on climate change? No. Were they being blamed on gas powered vehicles and carbon emissions and greenhouse gases and methane from cows? No. Why? Because it's called fucking weather. And weather happens every year for hundreds of years, whether it's hurricanes or storms or fires or excessive heat or extreme cold. Weather is cyclical, and you can go back decades and hundreds and thousands of years, and you will see that weather is cyclical. And sometimes it's more violent and destructive than other times, because that's how nature operates. And having an electric vehicle or an electric stove or getting rid of fossil fuels is not going to change the cyclical nature of the fucking weather.
Right. And, in order to even replace fossil fuels, there needs to be a reliable replacement plan. And guess what? Electric can't be it, because they've even admitted our current grid can't handle it. But have they figured out how to update our grid? No, they have no solution or resolution that they have brought forth. And speaking of electric, there's another interesting perspective on this whole switch to electric vehicles. So Tara, how Democrats historically are like the party of unions.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the United Auto Workers are really not happy with Biden right now, because his administration is pushing 100% electric vehicles in the early 2030s. Again, even though we don't have the grid to withstand it. So the UAW is striking because these electric vehicle plants are in places like Tennessee, which is outside of union control. And apparently it takes 40% fewer workers to make an electric vehicle than it does just a regular gas powered vehicle. So the unions are not happy about this. And, Biden throws out this line that says, oh, electric is going to create 1 million new jobs. Well, these jobs are in different states with a different set of skills. So it's not going to be something that many of these auto workers can just simply transfer to. And I was listening to Fox Business, and Kevin Hassett reported that this could affect 1 million American auto workers. And that's not even including other jobs that are associated with gas vehicles, like all the different mechanics and repairmen, gas stations. And when you add up like all those odd jobs, it adds up to 7.5 million workers that would be out of a job if we went 100% electric, like this administration wants. It would crumble the economy, he said. And he went on to say that China already did this and said the same thing, that they'd make up the loss with new electric jobs. And what ended up happening, it caused a major economic shock. And he says it will be even worse here. So now Biden has pissed off the unions. I can't think of a single demographic this guy hasn't pissed off yet. What about you, Tara? Can you think of anyone that he has not targeted at this point?
The what are we calling them now? The minor attracted person demographic. I think they're pretty.
The child hair sniffers.
Yeah, they're happy with him. And speaking of China, I think this came out in July. I remember seeing this article. There's a graveyard of electric vehicles in China. And the pictures, there's literally weeds and trees growing around them, because they have all these electric cars that the whole fucking program failed and they can't do anything with them. But speaking of Biden, I don't know if you saw this, Stephanie, but he was in Vietnam on Monday. I think he's still there, but he was pushing his climate change agenda and talking about carbon emissions. And as much as it literally pains me to hear this man speak, I'm going to play a clip from the press conference, because I'm sorry, he actually says that the threat of climate change in 20 years is more frightening than nuclear war. So let's listen to what Biden had to say.
There's more carbon absorbed from the atmosphere on a daily basis. And I'll look to my friend John Kerry, who's forgotten more about this than most people know. Correct me if I get this wrong, John, but I'm quite sure I'm right. And that is that there's more carbon absorbed from the air into the Amazon region, into the ground, than admitted in the entire United States on the same basis. Now imagine if people go in and do what we did 150, 250 years ago and cut down the forest and start farming in that area. No longer have that great carbon sink. If we, it would be a gigantic problem. So we should be going to areas, whether it's in the Congo or other places.
Wait a minute. Hang on. Oh, I hate these freaking sites.
Oh, did it play the wrong clip?
No, it's the right clip, but it stopped in the middle of the clip. Hang on.
50 years ago. And cut down the forest and start farming in that area. No longer have that great carbon sink. If we, it would be a gigantic problem. So we should be going to areas, whether it's in the Congo or other places, as the G7 nations and the wealthy G20 nations, and providing the kind of infrastructure they need to be able to benefit. And guess what? In addition to helping the environment overall, and the only existential threat humanity faces, even more frightening than a nuclear war, is global warming going above 1.5 degrees in the next 10 years. And we're in real trouble. There's no way back from that.
We'd be in real trouble because there's no way back from global warming in 20, maybe 10 years. And that's more of an existential crisis than nuclear war.
That was quite the run-on sentence. And all I could think was KJP had to have written that for him because that made no sense.
Nothing he says ever makes sense.
Oh my God. And why is he worried about building infrastructure in other countries when our own country is really not headed in a good direction right now, Sleepy Joe? Okay. Oh my gosh. So I read an article in the Epic Times that talked about this declaration that was signed by 1,600 scientists and professionals from all over the world, stating that there is no climate emergency, no real climate emergency, like they say. And the declaration explains how the Earth has gone through many cold and warm phases throughout history. And I guess the Little Ice Age only ended in the 1850s. So, of course, the planet is going to go through a period of warming after that. And it's actually happening at a much lower rate than they anticipated. And not to mention, when you see these charts that the climate activists like to use, they only look at a period going back to the 90s. They intentionally leave out data from decades prior because it wouldn't fit the narrative. It would make everything that they say just completely crumble. And you know how the whole climate crisis now is centered around CO2 emissions, like Joe was just saying. Well, this declaration points out that the CO2 is not a pollutant, first of all. It's actually great for our planet, and it's essential for plant growth and life on Earth. And the more CO2 we have, the higher the yield of crops. And Tara, that caught my attention because we've talked a lot about the whole World Economic Forum agenda of basically starving people and forcing them to eat bugs. And then you have Bill Gates with his lab grown meat. And maybe that's why they really have a problem with CO2. And this declaration also pointed out many flaws of using climate models, saying that they're not even remotely plausible as policy tools, and there's no evidence supporting claims of climate change causing severe weather events. They said it doesn't even make sense that they're trying to connect the two of those. And one of the physicists that signed the declaration is John Francis Clauser. And he said, quote, "The popular narrative about climate change reflects a dangerous corruption of science that threatens the world's economy and the well-being of billions of people. Misguided climate science has metastasized into massive shock journalistic pseudoscience," end quote. Sounds a lot like what happened during COVID and trusting the science, even though now, looking back, we realize that science was all fake propaganda.
Yeah, and yet they're trying to push that whole science COVID narrative again. And frankly, I can't believe Fauci even has the fucking nerve to say a word about masking up again when he should be in prison for all the deaths that he has caused. But that's an entirely different topic. So I'll just let that one go for now.
Yeah, why are they even letting him still talk? Like he
I
should
don't
be
know.
hidden away somewhere on an
He
island, keeping his
retired.
mouth
Like,
shut.
yeah, like he retired and now he's
Right.
back. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, I want to play a clip from C-SPAN where an EPA regulations hearing is taking place, where Gina McCarthy, who is the head of the EPA, can't even answer a basic understanding of CO2, which is the very reason for the insane regulations taking place in California, where this representative is from, that's questioning her.
What percentage of the atmosphere is CO2? I don't have that calculation for you. Maybe you can tell us what your personal.
I can't hear her. I can't hear anything.
Oh man, I wonder why that's happening again. Okay, well, I'll just explain what they were talking about. So the representative is asking the head of the EPA how much CO2 is even in the atmosphere and what the percentages are. And she has no idea. She's like, I don't know. I can't answer that. And he's like, okay, well, if you don't have the exact number, that's fine. Just take a guess. And she said, I can't make a guess right now. I don't make guesses or something like that. And he is like, okay, the whole purpose of this meeting and these regulations you want to put forth in California are because you're saying that CO2 emissions are like basically destroying the planet, but you don't have any idea how much CO2 is in the environment. And he went on to say that it was like 1/10 of a percent. So not even close to like 1%.
And she couldn't even guesstimate that.
She couldn't guesstimate it. And like she was completely lost. And it really made her look like an idiot. And it just pointed out that there really is no data or research behind any of this crap that they're trying to push and these policies that they're trying to get passed. And he basically made a case for like why CO2 is not an issue whatsoever, and how he went on to say that a lot of these real scientists said that the man-made CO2 isn't even, there's no direct causal link between that and climate change. And so it's like she didn't know any of her facts. She made no sense whatsoever and couldn't answer the most basic questions. So it's just like absolutely ridiculous. And I want to end the episode with a truly ridiculous climate change story involving none other than Bill Gates. So according to a video I found on the Epic Times, Bill Gates is providing seed funding for a company to cut down forests and bury the trees because they say that that'll be good for climate change because trees are fire hazards. And if they catch on fire, that's going to cause climate change, apparently. So, okay, are they going to cut down the trees and then use this lumber to build things? Nope. No, no, no. We are not putting that to good use. We are burying it in the ground. Literally, like he is providing funding for this and saying that this is going to reduce CO2, which makes no sense because trees absorb CO2 and give off oxygen. So shouldn't we be planting more trees? Like, wouldn't that make sense instead of cutting them down? It's like so absurd, Tara. But, no one questions these things. And clearly, Bill Gates has a financial interest in this. Like earlier, I said how, excess CO2 is great for growing crops. And Bill Gates just happens to be growing all of these genetically modified agriculture products. So not only does he want to destroy like the regular agriculture sector and the beef industry as a major food source, he wants to destroy forests now. Like, why not, Tara? Like, what? it's amazing to think that there are people out there that are like, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's just start chopping down forests and burying the trees.
Yeah, and I like how you referred to what he's growing as genetically modified agriculture products that is basically just going to be passed off as quote food for people.
Yeah.
But it's Bill Gates, so I can't believe it. And okay, I have one I have to share with you too. And if anyone's actually watching this instead of listening, you'll see that I've been drinking wine as we record this podcast. So I thought this was funny when I was sober, and I think it's even funnier right now. So I have to give a shout out to this guy named Joe Saunders. He's a writer at the Western Journal. And I literally laughed for several minutes when I read this article he wrote. And it was about how a family called the police on Biden admin energy secretary Jennifer Granholm because her entourage was blocking an electric vehicle charging station. And apparently this was a trip where Granholm and her crew were accompanied by this reporter from NPR who was doing a ride along with them because she was going to write an article on the future of electric vehicles on American highways. But apparently the trip did not go as planned. And I'm not going to read the entire article this guy wrote, but I am going to read snippets from it because I thought his writing was fantastic. So this guy Saunders writes, quote, "It happened in Grovestown, Georgia, about 170 miles from the Granholm starting point of Charlotte, North Carolina. At that distance, drivers in most gas-powered vehicles might be thinking about making a pit stop for a snack or to take care of some biological needs. But assuming they started with a full tank, filling up wouldn't be a necessity. Clearly, the situation was different for Granholm's caravan of electric vehicles, no doubt armor-plated to protect the indispensable secretary from the white supremacist domestic terrorists the Biden administration pretends are threatening the republic. Granholm's squad had planned to fast charge in the suburb of Augusta, Georgia, and that's where things went wrong." He then goes on to quote the NPR reporter's article, and then she wrote in her article, quote, "Her advance team realized there wasn't going to be enough plugs to go around. One of the station's 4 chargers was broken and the others were occupied. So an energy department staffer tried parking a non-electric vehicle by one of those working chargers to reserve a spot for the approaching Secretary of Energy. That did not go down well. A regular gas-powered car blocking the only free spot for a charger. In fact, a family was boxed out on a sweltering day with a baby in the vehicle. They were so upset they decided to get the authorities involved. They called the police." And at this point, Saunders starts his own commentary again, and he writes, quote, "Now the article is light on specifics. Domanowski, the author of the NPR author, doesn't even say exactly when the trip took place beyond, quote, this summer, but it's a fair assumption that calling the police wasn't the fuming family's first move. Most normal people would ask the driver of the offending vehicle to move out of the way first. Most normal people would probably ask again and then try to reason with the obstructionist individual and then go through the 5 stages of fury before finally getting the law involved. But just for the sake of argument, assume the family only asked once or twice to get access to the charger before dropping the dime. That in all likelihood means the staffer decided it was more important to keep the charging station reserved with an internal combustion powered vehicle for the Biden admin's big energy boss than it was for a family of presumably American citizens to power up a vehicle with a baby inside." So the article continues with statements from this NPR reporter, and she basically wrote that it's not illegal to block the charging stations, and the issue was eventually resolved peacefully. And of course, because NPR is a total leftist publication, the author of the article praised Granholm for being, quote, "the perfect person to help pitch the United States' ambitious shift to EVs." And then Saunders ends the article, and this was probably my favorite part, by writing, quote, "An official of an unnecessary department on an unnecessary road trip to promote an unwanted technology ends up infuriating a family to the point where someone actually calls the cops."
That is freaking perfect. I love that. And I love how they always call it this ambitious shift. No, it's a fucking stupid shift. Call it what it is, but that's so perfect. Yeah, I thought of another good one real quick. In the UK, where apparently no one showed up to bid on the offshore wind projects. So they will not be moving forward with any of them. And apparently they don't think that no one thinks it's worthwhile to move forward with this nonsense. So like they didn't even show up, they didn't submit a bid, and it was really embarrassing for the government. So yeah, like we don't have the electric grid, we don't have enough charging stations to go electric. People can barely get by as it is, let alone invest in electric vehicles, new appliances, fucking wind farms.
Nobody wants this shit. Like
No.
the people that want electric vehicles are the wealthy people who use it for short distance driving in the city. Nobody else wants a fucking electric vehicle.
And they don't help the planet. Like we've already done episodes on that. It's like they're not even helping the climate. Okay. So it's just so stupid. And like I said in the beginning, the next time someone tries spewing all of this climate crisis bullshit your way, just send this episode to them and educate them a little bit. We have to keep our eyes open to the facts and not fall for this fear, because they're going to keep pushing it. And when they see people aren't falling for it, they're probably going to make up some crazy shit. Do not listen, and we'll get through this. All right. So that's our latest climate update for you guys. I'm sure we'll have another one very soon. Thanks so much for tuning in, and